Would you like to know more?
Welcome to Almost a Podcast, episode 27 of Adventures in 3D Printing. Today we're going to be talking about the precautions you need to take when handling resin. I had an email from a listener to my regular podcast who's a doctor in Germany, and thank you very much for the email. We'll be talking about it in the main show as well. I thought it was important to talk about it on this channel as well. So he sent me some information about what to do when using resin, because being a man and how men are wired, most men are kind of risk, what's the word, not risk adverse, the opposite of risk adverse, just risk oblivious. Most men aren't very good at handling risk, so they just kind of ignore it. In the same way that human brains can't comprehend something with a high impact but low statistical risk of said thing happening, for example. So like, the risk of having a heart attack is quite small, but the outcome of having a heart attack can be potentially very bad. So we can't kind of marry these two together. So we just kind of ignore them and just treat it as if the risk doesn't exist. But it turns out the risk does exist. So we're just going to talk a little bit about that. I'm not trying to be too much of a Debbie Downer. Obviously, you're going to make your own choices. You're all adults. That's the way it is. But there is a tendency in some groups of men to not read instruction manuals and stuff because it's some kind of a threat to their masculinity. Well, reading instruction manuals is generally a good idea. And so we're going to look through this data sheet that the kind sir sent me. Proper handling of UV curable 3D printed resins. Ultraviolet curable resins for 3D printing additive manufacture cure rapidly when exposed to UV light. As with all chemicals, UV curable resins must be handled in a safe manner. The fact sheet is meant as a general guideline for handling UV curable resin materials, photopolymers, used in 3D printing systems such as SLA and digital light processing DLP and UV inkjet. So firstly it says consult manufacturer documentation, so read the documents. Use personal protective equipment. Wear appropriate chemical resistant gloves, nitrate or neoprene. Do not use latex gloves. Well, I've had 300 pairs of gloves in my time 3D printing. I haven't gone through all of them yet, but they are latex gloves. So after I finish using my 300 gloves, it's only 150 pairs. I'm doing what the British government does and claiming 2 items of PPE for 1 pair of gloves. So in future, I'm going to have to try and get nitrile or neoprene gloves rather than the latex gloves that I managed to find. It was quite hard to get any gloves, to be fair. Use safety spectacles, goggles with UV protection. That's an interesting one. The only things that is exposing the resins to UV lights are shielded by a screen, which is like like a case, which is 99.95% UV resistant or whatever. So, and I don't look into the UV light or the curing station, so that shouldn't be too much of an issue. It also says wear a dust mask when sanding or post-finishing parts, but it doesn't say about using any form of mask protection when you're either printing or cleaning up, which is interesting. Okay, so follow good housekeeping procedures. During setup, avoid placing a 3D printer over carpeted areas or use a barrier to avoid possibility of carpet damage. I do have a table, I do have a tablecloth. If it did get onto the carpet, it would more than likely knacker the carpet because this stuff is miserable to deal with when it spills. Do not expose UV curable resins to heat, flame, sparks, or any source of ignition. 3D printers and uncured open resin vats should be stored and operated in well-ventilated areas. Okay, we do that. It's harder in winter than summer, though, for sure. If UV curable resins comes in a sealed cartridge, which it doesn't, but I know some of the Formlab stuff do, so there's some things to do if you're using Formlab stuff there. If the UV curable resin is in a pourable bottle, carefully pour the liquid from the storage bottle into the printer tray, avoiding spills and drips. Yep. fair enough. Tools that may be contaminated, the material should be cleaned prior to reuse with a window cleaner or plenty of denatured or isopropyl alcohol, followed by thoroughly washing with soap and water. Keep the work area clean. Yeah, I mean, the problem with this photosensitive resin is it's very sticky, and small amounts of it on your fingers or gloves or whatever can transfer to other surfaces, and you don't know you've done it until it starts to cure, and then it can be quite problematic to get off depending on the surface. So for sure, you want to be changing gloves as often as possible. Wear gloves when handling parts directly from the printer. Absolutely. Wash the parts before post-curing using manufacturer's recommended solvents such as isopropyl or rubbing alcohol. I use the 99.9% IPA. Costs about £20 for 5 litres. That's what I'm using when I'm using stuff that needs IPA to clean it. Post-curing UV lights, as recommended by the manufacturer, should follow the wash before the printed object is handled without gloves. That's a thing I see people do all the effing time, is I see them touching the miniatures before they've been cured. Yes, they've been cured to a degree in the machine, but there's still uncured resin on these things, even after washed. So you need to, until they've been washed and until they're then dried and then being cured, you need to treat them as if they're contaminated, and you need to wear gloves. That's the least you should be doing, wearing gloves, because if you get this stuff in your eyes, and you're going to really know about it. Ensure that all kinds of 3D printed objects are fully post-cured by exposure to a UV light after forming in accordance with the printer manufacturer recommendations. Well, you can cure them using the wash and cure machine or cure them on your window ledge. It's quite easy to tell when they're cured because they actually change from something softish and sticky-ish potentially to something hardish and absolutely not sticky-ish. So, and we have the second part of this is personal hygiene practice. Do not eat, drink or smoke in the work area. Remove jewellery, rings, watches, bracelets prior to handling UV curable materials. Avoid direct contact with UV curable resins or contaminated surfaces, including any parts of the body or clothing. Do not touch resin without protective gloves, and do not get it onto your skin. Even doing all that, I'm pretty sure I've managed to get small amounts on my skin, and it is an irritant. You do feel maybe like a chemical burn kind of sensation, and then some kind of irritation and itching later. Wash hands, face or body parts that may be contacted with UV curable resins with a mild skin cleanser and soaps after handling. Do not use solvents. Remove and wash contaminated clothing or jewellery. Do not reuse any contaminated personal items until properly cleaned with detergent. Discard contaminated shoes and leather goods. Wow. Clean at work areas. Use absorbent rags. Clean spills immediately. Clean any contacted or exposed surfaces to prevent contamination. Clean with window cleaner. See, I didn't know about the window cleaner thing. Or denatured or isopropyl alcohol, followed by a thorough washing with cold water. First aid procedures. Flush eyes or skin thoroughly with plenty of water for 15 minutes. And don't ingest. Jesus Christ. I guess if you get it on your fingers because you're eating in the bloody room, you can ingest it. Prepare all for disposal. Fully cured resin can be disposed of with household items. See, that's good news. You don't need to go and try and find my pewter, the metal remnants from the pewter. You can't put that in household items. You have to deal with that separately because it's hazardous waste. Cure unreacted UV resins by leaving them in sunlight for a few hours or exposing them to a UV light. So that's, say you're washing your IPA and you're getting all the uncured resin out of it so that you can reuse it. Then you need to make sure that's dried out by leaving it in sunlight for a few hours, and then you can dispose of that in your normal household waste. Partially cured or uncured resin waste may be classified as hazardous materials. Please check your state's website for how to deal with those. Do not pour into the sink or dispose of into the water system. Should really need to say it, but I guess you do. Cleanup materials contained UV curable resins should be isolated in sealed, labelled containers and disposed of as hazardous waste. Do not pour these materials down the drain or into the water system. Clean up materials containing UV curable resins. So that could be if you've had a small spill, or if you're cleaning out your vat, the paper towels or whatever you use. And they potentially haven't been cured, so they are then hazardous waste, because it's only fully cured resin that can be dealt with normally. And then it says store correctly, keep UV curable resins sealed tightly in their containers out of direct sunlight and within the temperature ranges. It's normally like 25 to 30 degrees, but I haven't had any issues at 20 degrees centigrade. I had a lot of issues when I went below that. A small headspace of air is needed to keep the resin from gelling. Do not fill resin containers to the top of the opening. Do not pour used uncured resin back into new resin bottles. I have put used uncured resin back into half-used bottles, because when I clean out the vat I have to put the resin somewhere, so I put it back after filtering in the bottle that I'm using. Do not store uncured resin in refrigerators used for food and beverage storage. One of the nuts things I saw recently was people talking about, is this safe to eat from? Absolutely not. No way, Jose. This is not like that silicone stuff that you can use for baking. This is a completely different animal. I mean, whenever I've talked to people in the miniature manufacturing business, they resin's one of the things that they get a bit hairy, scary about. But as long as you're safe and as long as you're sensible, there shouldn't be any issues. But please don't treat this like something to just be kind of blasé about, because I don't believe it is. I believe that even if it's not something that's going to do any long-term damage, it can certainly cause you some skin irritations and lung irritations and stuff. And so just do the right thing is the answer. In wrap up today, thanks to Jan, is the gentleman's name, for the email, and thanks for the advice, and hopefully see you on the Discord League if you manage to make it. We're kicking off 1st of January.